When you approach American Flat, you don't see it at first. You have to kind of go around the bend. And when you come around the bend, and then as you come down the hill, you come across this enormous landscape that is inviting. As you walk through those spaces, the distance perspective of the piers, of the hallways as they appear now, not as they're structurally intended, but the structures create these environments where there's literally patterns and layers of hallways, of markings on these hallways, of evidence of activity. It's the perfect outlaw site. It's an attractive nuisance, there's no question about it.
The history of mining on the Comstock, in a nutshell, begins with an initial strike in 1859. Obviously, after 10 years of mining in California, there were plenty of people out here turning over every possible rock for the next big find. Turns out that the big find was here.
Miners who were doing California-style placer mining had worked their way up the canyon and discovered two outcroppings of what in essence was a mother lode of gold and silver. It was one of the richest strikes in world history of gold and silver, produced in today's terms tens of billions of dollars in mineral wealth.
The American Flat Mill is a very interesting historic resource. We are in the Comstock Historic District and the Virginia City National Historic Landmark. And this is where the mining history of Nevada really began, up here on the Comstock.
The Comstock went through a series of bonanzas and borrascas, as they say, ups and downs. And after the 1880s, of course, they were the glory days of the Comstock. And from that point on, the hardy souls that stayed were always looking for the next big bonanza. A group then formed and said, you know, we believe there's gold and silver in the American Flat area. We're going to build a mill down there. It was going to be the largest, most productive mill of its kind in the world. And so it was built.
United Comstock Mill was constructed in the early 20s, and basically the cost of building the mill was about $5 million, and this was a group called United Comstock Mining that really foot the bill to put the mill site together. At the time, it was one of the largest. It was planned to be one of the largest mills in the country. Its capacity was about 2,500 tons per day.
When this building was constructed, it was the largest cyanide operation in the world at that time. It required a very extensive consortium of backers to build this much of a facility. It actually starts way up in Gold Hill in the center of the Comstock, where there's a tunnel connecting us from here almost 10,000 feet long to the heart of the Comstock.
The American Flat facility was on a scale that one had not seen, certainly in the Comstock in the past. It was a very large, very complex facility. It had its own railway. It had, the entire processing facilities, everything that you would need, plus all of the infrastructure to support the people that worked out there. So this was on a scale well beyond what had been seen in the past, even on the Comstock.
If you can look at the old pictures, the structure was just a marvelous structure, the mill and then the outbuildings. To me, what has always been impressive is that they planned a community where 500 people could live. And that ranged from dormitories with mess halls to individual family locations, both 1- and 2-bedroom homes. So it was set up to last. The streets were laid out properly. Water supply was more than adequate. For a brief period of time, it must have been a very impressive structure, and it was one that was welcomed by all of the newcomers to the Comstock, and certainly the old-timers thought, here we go again.
At that period, when this American Flat Mill was constructed, we were talking mostly animal and human labor, very labor intensive. The materials that were used here, as much as possible, are from this site. The material is concrete, basically, along with the reinforcement bar. But for the concrete, all the aggregate was mined from an open pit that is right above the mill itself. So that was the biggest problem that they had, was the aggregates. They made their own right here. They had their own crushing and sorting plant for that. The other materials all had to be manufactured elsewhere and brought in. The Virginia and Truckee Railroad was active at that time, and the spur was run right into this site. So that made the transport of those materials quite simple.
Of course, with building this mill in the 1920s, there was a new resurgence of a community out here at American Flat. New houses, a lot of workers came in and enjoyed the benefit of this source of employment. And hopes were high that the cyanide process with a large, efficient mill would make marginal ore bodies profitable once again.
This was going to be the salvation of the mining business up here. As had been other projects before that, it was going to basically revive the Comstock and bring back the good old days of the 1860s and 70s, and all things would be great and everything would be right with the world.
The American Flat Mill is far enough away from Virginia City, Gold Hill, and Silver City that it was not really practical to have most of the workers commute to this site. So another small company town was built right very close to the mill site, and the houses were mostly prefabricated, brought into the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, and built up here. And a couple of the houses still survive in the area.
It was the new hope. If you grew up on the Comstock and you were involved with mining families, the next bonanza, there's gold and silver in them thar hills, and we're going to find it. So there was always hope that there was going to be another bonanza. And that was going to be it at American Flats.
At the time in which American Flat, or well actually the United Comstock merger mill was set up, and the consolidated mines were envisioned, was the early 19-teens, 1920s, a period in which Virginia City was in an economic depression. And so it was welcomed, the opportunity to renew the mining economy was welcomed by the community and was the subject of a great deal of celebration in the time it was proposed.
The history of Comstock has always been a matter of interplay between optimists and pessimists. And the optimists have usually been right. The Comstock does come back to life. And when the plans were laid out to build a huge new cyanide processing mill out here in American Flat, it was a reason for the optimists to say the Comstock would be alive again. It hadn't been that long since the 1903 bonanza had occurred. It gave 10 years life to this area. It slumped again, but people have always felt that there's gold and silver inside these hills that can be profitably mined, and this was a sign that once again there could be a period of bonanza.
On the kickoff day, it had to be one heck of a celebration, because this was, as I said before, the new big bonanza. It was the salvation to bring mining back to the Comstock.
This place is called American Flat because it's the bottom of a bowl, so it's kind of flat. And flat land on the Comstock's pretty rare because it's a mountainous community. The American, I'm assuming that that's just a tribute to the patriotism of the time. The Comstock was filled with pro-Union, pro-American patriots, and they really did have a commitment to the Union throughout the Civil War period. So naming this American Flat, I think, was a tribute to their patriotism and their focus on the importance of preserving the Union.
The period after the big boom in the 1860s and 70s, is characterized by people trying to revive mining in Virginia City. Everybody wanted the good old days to come back. And there were, as I said, several attempts to use new facilities, new mining techniques, new technological, innovations, new ways of processing ore. to try and revive the mining economy here. And American Flat represents the last real serious large-scale attempt to do that.
I believe that the folks up here on the Comstock just believed that we were leading edge again. We had reestablished ourselves with that mill, which was the largest in the country, if not the world, that we had regained our rightful place as the best mining operation in the world.
It was a big deal, and this was a considerable investment in the anticipation that that remining, that shallow mining would be profitable.
The American Flat Mill and its development came at a critical time on the Comstock. It was a depression area here, so it brought a large amount of jobs. Just the construction of this place, it took a lot of local labor to produce this thing, and then for the jobs to actually reopen the mine and to work the mill. So it created a huge economic burst at the Comstock in a period when it desperately needed to have that impetus.
The American Flat was going to be the rebirth, if we use that term. It was going to be the next step forward that would bring back the glory bonanza days of the 1870s, 1860s, 70s, and 80s. It was going to put Virginia City back on the map as the leading mining industrial center of the world. It had all of that potential. So speaking from my own ancestors, they were smiling. That this was going to be their ticket, if you will.
This mill was quite efficient for its time. They did a good job of recovering what came into the mill. The big problem that they had with this mill was that the ore that came into it was not as rich as they had hoped. So no matter how efficient they were at this mill, they really couldn't recover the costs.
It was sort of the last hurrah for large-scale mining. I think when it went out, a lot of people gave up on trying to continue to have mining be the focus of the community. And it's interesting that it goes down in the 1920s, and at the very same time, the beginnings of the tourist economy are starting to perk up here.
So bottom line is they processed roughly 2 million tons. They grossed roughly, $7 million in this case. But the problem was they spent $5 million on the mill, and plus they had to pay all their employees and spend a lot of money looking for additional resources that never developed.
The price of silver continued to go down drastically in the 1920s. There were lots of production from overseas. Silver was cheap, and they just couldn't make it pay. The economics just didn't work. So within the course of 2 or 3 years after it was completed, it went through bankruptcy and was essentially abandoned. They came to American Flat, they built in steel reinforced concrete, which was the latest innovation in industrial architecture. That material lasts a long time, even if you leave it alone and let it sit out in the weather. And that's the reason why so much of American Flat is still there. If it had been built out of timber, the timber would have been salvaged. They would have taken it apart and hauled it off to be reused someplace.
Anything of value was taken away. And ultimately, the folks that were left without jobs likely went to the next mining town that was just starting up, and word traveled fast, and that's probably where they ended up.
When the mills closed in the mid-1920s here in American Flat, the community dwindled, and workers were out of jobs. Some families moved into Virginia City, some just simply left the area. And the population declined, obviously, but there have always been people living out here, hangers-oners, people who just found a way to make a living and remain here.
Very early on, they took everything that was of salvage value, which of course was metal, and there was a huge amount of metal. That's why the only thing that's left, of course, is the concrete, because there wasn't a market for that. And so that skeleton that's still there today, anything that could be taken out, whether it was railroad tracks or metal beams, they were taken and sold, and it was just a noble experiment that didn't make it.
I'm certain that everything that wasn't absolutely nailed down was sold off during the bankruptcy. I mean, even to the point of selling the workers' houses and hauling them from American Flat to Virginia City or wherever else you find one.
As typical of these mills, all the usable materials were sold at auction and carted away. And after that, it was simply left here and abandoned. No one had any use for it, and there's no other development in the area really, so it became a playground for people. For generations of kids on the Comstock would come here and party. So that use is not a recent thing. It's been going on ever since it shut down.
I think when they finally got the notice that the mine was not going to make it and it was shutting down, and there was a notice that said that, there were probably some terms, heck darn son of a gun, because it altered the path of many, many people's lives. They thought that mining had reestablished itself and that they had a place to live and a place to work, and of course the schools were good and the kids could go to school. So life was great, and all of a sudden when that bubble popped, then people that had come into Virginia City and to the area to work had to pack up and leave.
I was actually born in Nevada and moved up to the Comstock in 1972. I was 10 years old, and at that time American Flats was a wonderland, and we went there every chance we got. We used to cut school a lot and sneak up the canyon to American Flats, figuring it was far enough that our parents would never bother to go up there and look for us, and probably could never find us up there either.
American Flat provides an opportunity for us to physically interact with a site in a way where nobody really seems to care, because it's the detritus of a mining era, so that we can function within it. And that's something different. To be able to be physically engaged with the landscape is a lot different than just standing there looking at it. That separation, while it's so common in the history of art, we look at the image of something. To interact with it is really quite different, and it changes your experience and your knowledge. It's a three-dimensional, real-time experience as opposed to just observing it.
This is such a magnificent piece of modernist architecture that we're standing in here, this building in particular. Now, if you look at Albert Kahn's famous building at the Ford Dearborn plant, which is a national landmark, this building looks exactly like it, right down to the elevator towers on its roof. So it's very strange to see a building of that quality transplanted out here in the middle of nowhere in the American West.
The cultural significance of the American Flat Mill is multi-layered. As a representative of the 1920s efforts to reintroduce a bonanza on the Comstock, this place is significant just in those terms. But the fact that it's continued to be a cultural icon and that it's celebrated and draws all sorts of people.
There is a subculture of people who know about it, visit it regularly, will cross any barrier, tackle any line, do anything they can to get over there if they can. Why? Because it is a fascinating, engaging, attractive, and you can call it a nuisance if you want, but it is a playground of history. And we're so often forbidden from interacting physically with the landscape. Here's an opportunity, rightfully or wrongfully, for visitors to go in and interact using their imagination.
After the mill was dismantled, it was essentially abandoned. It had no further economic use from then until the present. But the place was never abandoned as far as people using the property.
Well, for those of us that were growing up at that time, it was to go down and, contrary to directions from parents, don't be down around the mill. Well, of course, that was an invitation to go down around the mill, and it was a fascinating place to prowl around. It was just a kind of a mysterious, fun place that when you didn't have anything else to do, well, let's go down to Flats and prowl around the mill. So it was just part of the Comstock, and in fact, for many years, it was used as kind of a social location.
It's been a curiosity, you can imagine, since 1926 until present. People have been roaming in and out of these buildings and looking at the structures, and as you can see, it's kind of gone into a phase where it's become an artist's haven, where a lot of folks like to express themselves with interesting artwork, and it's ever changing. But at the same token, it really is a physical safety hazard.
There's been recreational use out there as well. I know that the ATVers are quite fond of getting in there and bashing around. The paintballers absolutely love it. So you know, that's the perfect sort of bombed out landscape that it lends itself to running around playing with paintballs.
After this mill closed at American Flat, it was partially dismantled, but then continually dismantled over time. But it's been an icon for all of northern Nevada. Kids come out here to party. Obviously, they've brought their spray cans, great place for paintball, and there's been a lot of activity out here. It's become an icon that people really enjoy and celebrate.
I know that the canvas changes over time, that the concrete walls lend themselves to large and compelling works of art. It is indeed a mecca for artists, not only those that want to create the art here, but those that want to document a story.
You know, a lot of people say that this graffiti out here is not worth our time, but the fact is it's attracted artists. They're folk artists, and as a folk center of activity and expression, it's extremely important. I think this is one of the more important sites from a folklore point of view.
Early on, when we were kids, it was almost entirely high school type graffiti, very base and crude, and lots of, you know, Vicky Loves Joe and big hearts. And it seems like it transferred more in the late 80s and 90s, where it started to be real art, huge murals and things like Picasso styles, and things that were obviously took a fair amount of talent to produce and time to produce.
It became an abandoned ruin with all the attractions of an abandoned ruin for those that like to explore and go out. And I think that there were, and continue possibly to be, fairly notorious parties out there. I think it was the site of many a kegger back in the day.
One of the first times I went to American Flats, I think it was like 71 or 72, some students from UNR had set up huge speakers in the building and a sound system and had a gigantic party. I would say maybe 1,000 people. It was huge. I was very young and managed to kind of sneak in from the backside and was tolerated by the college students.
When I look at American Flat, this is something new. This is something different. This is something where mining landscapes have been appropriated, incorporated, reinterpreted. They become alive. The landscape now has its own ongoing historical narrative, and it's unpredictable, it's engaging, and it's very dynamic.
The American Flat Mill is one of the touchstones for people that live up here on the Comstock. It's someplace that everyone ends up going to repeatedly, and everyone is drawn to it. There's nothing like it anywhere in the region, and it has a sort of aesthetic effect that is very powerful. So we see that anything from just local teenagers to professional photographers and artists that keep coming out here and be drawn to the place.
The fact that we as a people seem to need these kinds of structures, not just to be entertaining, but because they give us a sense of our own history. We don't have the European tradition going back hundreds and indeed thousands of years. We make our own history and claim it, and we interact with ruins in quite a fascinating way. And here's a ruin that is so unique in its concrete structure and scale that it offers a canvas for not just the graffiti that is so common in that site, but also you can climb up it, you can dig down, you can dive into the waters that have risen within it.
If we could scrub off the graffiti and just show what it was like in the 50s and early 60s when I remember it and was wandering around down there, It was a marvelous structure. It was kind of an awe-inspiring structure.
American Flat ties all of these together and offers an opportunity to really integrate a varied and unintentional use in terms of respecting the history of Nevada and of the Comstock.